Welcome to the PrisonPOD, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. PrisonPOD, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Welcome to the Prison Pod. Today we have a special guest joining us. It is John R. Whitman, and I want to talk to him about the Creative Prisons Project. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Valerie. Thank you for having me on, and hello to all your viewers.
I'm really excited about having you today, and just from our little chat beforehand here, I found out that we had a common person to talk about. I just wanted to say that I became really interested in John's work because last year I recorded Robert Odom, and he talked about how important art is as a therapeutic need in prison. And I found out that he actually has one of his drawings featured in John's book. So I was really interested. A lot of people have problems accessing art material or sharing what they're doing in prison. And I felt this was such an important conversation for us to have. So I really appreciate you being with us today, John.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
So let's jump right in. And how did you start doing this work?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's really interesting work, and it's so fascinating to work with so many people who are serving time in prison. This started a number of years ago when I met a professor of law at Howard University in Washington, D.C., whose specialty was intellectual property, and particularly protecting intellectual property for underserved communities. As at the time, I had started the Museum for Black Innovation and Entrepreneurship to try to promote innovation and entrepreneurship in Black communities. I was in D.C. at the time. Southeast D.C. is predominantly Black. It's an underserved community, and yet there's tremendous creativity there. There's a long tradition in the United States of exploiting creativity from underserved communities in general, but particularly the Black community. And this was an area of interest to me. He and I then collaborated in producing some academic articles on protecting intellectual property. And this led to how I found out about prisons as being a particularly underserved community that was generally neglected in terms of its creative potential. There's a long history of exploiting labor among people who are in prison. That goes way back. But there's not been much opportunity for people who are behind bars to be creative and especially to benefit from their creativity. So this is an area that attracted my interest, and the more I got into it, the more I could see the need for this type of work. So I would say a number of years ago, my point of entry was to protect the intellectual property of people who are in prison, and it's taken off since then.
I love that idea. So have you interviewed people that are in prison about their work and how it affects them?
Yes, one of the first things I found out was that for people who are in prison, it's very difficult to register your copyright. So you've produced something, it's a piece of writing, it's a piece of visual art, for example, or even music that you've composed. It's not easy to register copyright from prison. The U.S. Copyright Office has made it much easier for people to register copyrights online, but of course you have to have access to the internet. And by definition, that would exclude everyone, for example, in federal prison, because you just don't have access to the internet. So we pulled together a number of people, a couple of lawyers and some law students, and came up with what we call a copyright protection protocol, so that if you are residing in a prison someplace, this gives you directions, advice on how you can register your copyright. Let me just back up, Valerie, and say why this is important. It turns out that in the U.S., when you write something or compose something or create a drawing, in law, you automatically own the copyright to your creation. But if ever you had to go to court to sue somebody who's appropriated your work, and especially if they're making money from it, you would need to show that you have registered your copyright. That's why registration is important. It's not a question of whether you own the copyright. You do own the copyright, but if you want to pursue a court case, you have to show that you've registered it. That's why when you produce works that you think might have commercial value or that might be appropriated by other people without your permission, it's a good idea to have it registered. And that's why the registration is so important. I also want to say, Valerie, that if you look at the potential of creativity in prison, it's really quite vast. There are nearly 2 million people behind bars. These days, it's about 1.7 million people who are behind bars. If you aggregate that population, that's equivalent to the 5th largest city in the country. So you have New York City, you have LA, you have Chicago, which is where I am right now, you have Houston, and then you have Phoenix. Well, what I call Prisonopolis, which is this mythical city of people who are in prison in the U.S., that would be the 5th largest city, Prisonopolis, after Houston. And when you consider how important innovation is to the economy of the United States, it's really terrible that we are missing out on the creativity of what's equivalent to the 5th largest city in the country. There's just huge potential behind bars. And my project, which I call the Creative Prisons Project, the aim of Creative Prisons Project is to turn prisons into sources of creativity worldwide, not just in the U.S., but around the world, so that society can benefit from the creativity that can emerge from prisons around the world.
I think that's amazing because there's so much history, first of all, in art and writing and stories. I mean, they say a picture has 1,000 words. When you think of the stories that can be told through art, and I've had some conversations with other people about our right as public citizens to be able to view those pieces of art because it's showing a piece of, well, it's a piece of our country. I mean, a huge piece of our country when you point out how large our prison population is compared to large cities. So I just think that it's really an important point that you're making there.
Yeah, you asked me if I had interviewed people in prison. Well, what I decided to do was I decided to write a book, which ended up being called Prisons of Creativity. And in the book, I wanted to feature creators who were actually behind bars while I was writing the book. It's very, very hard just to contact people who are in prison. I tried, for example, thinking about maybe doing a survey of people who are in prison, but logistically, it's very hard, as you know. It's also very hard to communicate with people in prison. I have sent letters to people in prison, get bounced back for the silliest reasons, like my return envelope, my return address was on a label instead of being written on the envelope. The envelope can be the wrong color. You can have too many sheets of paper in the envelope. There are any number of reasons why they make it very, very difficult to communicate with someone who's in prison. And of course, that not only penalizes the recipient of the mail, but also the sender, also me. So what I ended up doing was I had to go through people who already had contact with people inside. And I was able to find a number, I think it was around 25 maybe folks inside that we knew were doing artwork, they were doing writing, they were doing music, and so forth. And I was able to contact some, offered them an honorarium to tell me their stories and to share their work, gave them an additional honorarium if I used their work in my book. And this is how I found the people who now appear in the book. So Prisons of Creativity, Artistic Innovation During Incarceration. And in this book, I make the case. I make the case for why it makes sense for the wardens or superintendents of prison facilities to encourage more creativity in prison. And the argument is that we've found from research that people who engage in creative work tend to have fewer behavioral infractions. And that's in everybody's interests. Um, the residents themselves have better relationships with each other. There are fewer conflicts with the COs and so forth. So that makes sense. So I was able to contact these individuals who shared their stories with me, and they also shared their artwork, their music. So we have links to their music and their writing, and that's all featured in the book here. And it turns out, Valerie, that one of the individuals was the man that you mentioned in the open, and that's Robert Odom. So he's in the book, several pages on Robert Odom in the book. I know he'll be very pleased to hear that.
Well, Robert's artwork is incredible. Some of it looks like a photograph. He does people's faces, and they are just, he catches the spark in the eye, and it's some of the most incredible work that I've seen, comparable to anything I've seen in a museum.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun putting that book together. If you can't get a copy yourself, perhaps you can ask your library to get it for you. It is in hardback, and it will give you some good ideas. I want to go back, Valerie, though, and emphasize why this tapping into creativity in prison is so important to society. I've
Right.
already mentioned the benefits to the prison administrators, but it's also of benefit to society. And the reason goes back to the Constitution. The people who wrote the Constitution felt it was very important for the country to benefit from creativity within the country. This is where we get innovation. This is what gives us our competitive advantage in the world, is through the innovation of its people. So in Article 1 of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, we have a clause in there that in which the Constitution instructs Congress to set up a means to protect the ownership of the creations both of inventors and of writers and other expressive works for a period of time during which they can benefit financially from their own productivity. In other words, the Constitution has a clause which provides an incentive for people to be creative and to share their creations with the public. As this applies to prison, when we talk about the fifth largest city and creativity in the fifth largest city, the intent of the Constitution is not to suppress that, but in fact to encourage it, to incentivize it, and to get these works out to the public for the public's benefit. So when we come back to Robert Odom's artwork, for example, one of the biggest challenges is how do we get artwork from behind the bars, from inside? How do we get it outside so that the public can benefit from it? And better yet, even perhaps pay for it. Well, this is part of the supply and demand problem that I'm trying to work on right now. On the supply side, we've established that there are 1.7 million people who are intrinsically creative, and if given the opportunity and the encouragement, could produce literary works, writing, journalism. They could produce drawings, paintings, sculpture even. They could produce music, theatrical works. All of these types of creativity are copyrightable. And the products that they produce could get out to the public, but it's very difficult to do that right now. So one problem or project that Creative Prisons Project is working on in this supply and demand question is how to create channels from the supply side inside to the public on the outside. And that's not easy to do. Some of the players in this field are nonprofit organizations that create opportunities to exhibit works that are produced inside prison. Some try to collect such works from the creators and then to sell them on the outside. And these can be nonprofit or for-profit. But there's a question of trust. There's been some misappropriation of some of these works, even by nonprofits. And so the question of trust is very, very important. And I don't need to tell you that People in prison are, by definition, a vulnerable population. They're easily taken advantage of because they don't have many recourses to protect their own interests. So when, for example, an artist inside shares his or her artwork, once it's outside the prison, it's very difficult to control. And so you have to have a very high level of trust with the people that you're working with. And at the moment, there is no single entity, preferably nonprofit, that can represent the artwork or the creative works of people inside. But there needs to be. There needs to be a sort of Amazon-type organization that would be trustworthy and that could take creative works from the inside, make them available to the public, and then if there's payment for them, make sure that those funds are appropriately deposited according to the wishes of the creator. Now, logistically, there are some issues that pertain around restitution and, payment for the time that you're inside and so forth. And those details would have to be worked out. But even so, the very idea that you can be productive while you're imprisoned and also be able to put money aside for when you get out would be a very forward-looking asset to put in place. So if anyone has ideas on how that could happen, please let me know.
Well, one thing is it also creates an opportunity for employment when they come out. It gives them confidence because they've already done it.
Mm-hmm.
And most people who get involved in any type of education or creative endeavor, it is therapeutic in one way or another, even if it's just occupying the time that you need to do something positive with. Is there a favorite part of your work?
What's the favorite part? Well, the favorite part is just discovering new things, I think. And since this is fairly uncharted territory, not a lot of people have written about or done research on how to encourage creativity in prisons. There are a lot of opportunities for contribution here. So the project itself is just tremendously interesting and tremendously gratifying. I don't know a lot of people who are in prison. And one of the most fascinating things to me is being able to get in touch with them and hearing their stories, especially in ways where they can open up about what the experience is like and what their needs are. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to tour Cook County Jail, which is one of the largest jail facilities in the country. They have about 6,000 people inside. And almost by definition, all the people there are presumed innocent until they go to trial. And many of them are in there because they're awaiting trial. And some have been in there for years. I think some as many as 14 years, which is just unbelievable. It's hard to imagine. In any case, they have a tremendous amount of creative work going on inside Cook County Jail. They have a culinary program. They're making pizzas every day for delivery, not only within the jail, but also to the outside community to raise funds. They have a tremendous artwork program. They've got a music studio where they record their own music and distribute it. So it's phenomenal. And I hope to write a case study on that. That'll be very interesting. So that was a good opportunity to see inside. And then just yesterday, I had a conversation with a fellow who'd been inside. He'd been serving time for about 6 years in New York State. And now that he's on the outside, he's working with a nonprofit organization to address the needs of underserved youth, for example, in his area. And it was just fascinating to hear his story about how he ended up in prison and what could be done to prevent that outcome for so many people.
I think that's really important, especially for youth to hear.
Yes, that's right.
Attention. Choreo, a better way to connect with loved ones who are incarcerated. Without Choreo, family and friends wait for a call and hope they can answer. With Choreo, inmates can call or message at any time. When your inmate calls their Choreo number, they will hear your voice and text messages. Inmates receive and leave messages at any time using standard prison phones, making connection easy and predictable. For information about Choreo, visit choreo.org. Stay connected.
He wants a whole village, he says he loves me in a love language I cannot speak. Leaves me in pieces, says he wants peace in a love language I cannot speak.
We had a discussion about this movement called the Abolish Prisons movement, the prison abolishment movement. And I think we both agreed that the efforts would be better spent if we try to abolish poverty, because
Yes.
many people who do end up behind bars come out of very impoverished communities. That's not to say that the poor create criminality or are criminals, but that the conditions of poverty leave one without very many legitimate options, especially to earn an income. So he described his own experience, which is one of having grown up in a difficult family that was very, very poor. He was extremely hungry. He used to steal candy, which he found he could then sell at school to make money to buy real food for himself and his sister. That once you start stealing and see how it's done, it goes from candy to other things, and then you fall in with the wrong group, and that gives you positive feedback that you're not getting from your family, for example. And one thing leads to another, you get caught, and then your life is changed forever. That's not necessarily an individual failing. There's a huge social responsibility for the communities in which people have so few options for legitimate income. This is something society has to address, and addressing it through prisons is not the best approach. So we need to reshift resources into trying to improve communities, and I think ultimately that's what the Abolish Prison program is all about. But I think if they were to expand the label to abolish poverty, it might be a larger and more effective movement.
I think you have a very good point there. And the whole thing about poverty is with poverty comes where you live, the type of education you get, the amount of sleep you get, the amount of food you get, all the
Yeah.
things that help develop us through childhood into adulthood. And it's at no one's fault other than society not looking out for everybody. And I think that, you address something very important, that I think abolish poverty would get much further than abolish prisons, because there are some circumstances where we need to protect society from certain individuals. I'm not saying that everybody in prison, because everyone in prison is not a risk to society. And a matter of fact, the majority are of no risk at all when they come out, because it was a one-time thing. It wasn't, they're not a serial criminal. I think we could even address poverty in prisons, because the more money you have for a prison, you decide whether or not you do that for punitive reasons or if you're going to use that money for rehabilitative reasons. And I think that creativity is a huge step towards rehabilitation. Don't you?
Yes, absolutely. That's correct. There have been some studies done. There need to be more studies done. But what we have to do is come up with really hard evidence to show how engaging in creativity has measurable outcomes that benefit society and benefit also the carceral facilities themselves. One thing we found is that through engaging in programs like creating art gives an individual the opportunity to come up with a new identity, a source of self-esteem, because you're building skills that will last you for the rest of your life, but also a source of self-esteem if you're producing artwork that, especially if it's appreciated by other people and they see you as having a talent that maybe you didn't realize you had before. But Valerie, you asked me about what is interesting about my job, or my work, I should say, and that is one thing occurs to me, which is that if you're talking about creativity in prisons, you're talking about trying to be creative in an environment in which the deprivation is just extreme. You don't have access to materials. When you look around you, you're scratching your head and wondering, what is even worth drawing in this environment? Like, why would you want to draw so many bars or whatever? And I've also heard from some of the artists that I've worked with that they have shown incredible ingenuity in pursuing their creativity. This one fellow, for example, whose artwork I've published, not just in this book, but in previous papers, I think he was in solitary. He'd never had an artistic background, but what he did was he fashioned a paintbrush out of toothbrush bristles. He squeezed the ink out of pens, and just using those materials with paper, he began to teach himself how to draw, how to create artwork. And he's done some just amazing works. Let's see. Another thing that occurs to me is that if you know anything about Islamic art, for example, in Islamic art, you typically don't create images of human beings. There are religious reasons for that. And so Islamic art has created the most extraordinary use of geometric designs that are very, very beautiful. If you look at a mosque, for instance, you will see the mosque is just full of all kinds of intricate geometric designs that are very, very beautiful. And it turns out that to do these geometric designs, first of all, anybody can learn how to do them. They're very basic. But you don't need to look outside your own mind's eye to be able to come up with geometric designs. So if you are in a place that has nothing worth drawing from your point of view, you can always do these geometric designs that can end up quite beautiful. So Islamic art generally consists of three types of representation. One is the geometric designs. One is calligraphy, where they're drawing typically Arabic letters in very beautiful ways. And then the third is representations from nature, which could be leaves or vines or birds, anything that's non-human. And if you look at Islamic art, you'll see some of the most extraordinarily beautiful pieces emerging from Islamic art. So one challenge, Valerie, that I've been thinking about is how we can come up with a self-instruction booklet that would show somebody inside how to get started in doing this type of drawing, this type of creativity, which would be quite interesting.
I think that would be really beneficial, especially to people who think they don't have any artistic ability, because we are all artists somewhere in there. We just don't, it might not be putting pen to paper. It may be cooking or photography, through dance.
That's
So it's
exactly
different
right.
creative expression.
That's
I
exactly.
wanted to, one thing that really amazes me about some of the art that I see that from people that have been in 20 or 30 years, that they can still retain the beauty. They can put that beauty still on paper. Like you said, they don't see much of that. And there isn't even a large variety of color inside. It's usually the grays, tans, orange, red if they're on death row. But I'm always surprised when I see that. And I also thought about with the geometric things, I've seen some stuff that almost looks like a kaleidoscope when you look in a kaleidoscope. The way they capture the color and light is amazing. And I've seen that with the Islamic art. But I had not realized, and I don't know why, that I've never seen people in Islamic art. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yes, anything that is yeah. Islamic art has this prohibition. I don't know if it's explicit or just as a matter of norms, not to draw human forms. In any case, back to your point about this universality of this creative impulse, that's absolutely true, which is why the scope of the work that I'm doing is global. Every human has this creative potential that can be brought out, and that's a universal thing. So we hope to. One thing we launched this year was the first international journal for creativity inside. And we have now an international editorial advisory board. It's a nonprofit journal. It is published through Florida State University. We will have our first edition out in January of 2026. We already have 27 articles submitted for this journal. It should appeal both to academics who are doing studies on creativity inside, as well as practitioners, people who deliver art education, art skills programs to people inside. Both. So we're very excited about that. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So, if someone who's listening inside a facility right now, if they want to find out more about you or get in touch with you, is there a way that they can do that?
Yes, certainly it's very easy to contact me online, and I'll give you my email address so you can post that for people who have access to the internet. For others, I'll give you my mailing address where people can send me mail. So
Oh,
yes, it is very, very easy. I'm also
okay,
very
great.
interested in hearing how people inside can provide advisory direction for the project, the Creative Prisons Project. Any ideas or suggestions would really be very, very helpful. Very
It would
helpful.
be important to have their voice at the table.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that we're working on, back to the supply and demand problem that I'm trying to work on, taking creative works from inside and making them available to the public outside, is we're trying to increase the number of educational programs for learning about these creative arts inside. So that's one area on the supply side that needs to be developed further. We have to get more people engaged in teaching writing and teaching visual arts, music, and so forth on the inside. One area, interestingly enough, is landscape design. It turns out there's a lot of interest in designing gardens and designing landscapes. And that's another, architecture is another copyrightable protective area. So that also, we're really interested in hearing from people who are interested in working inside. We need to come up with some maybe templates or examples of contracts or MOUs, memoranda of understanding, between a carceral facility and somebody who teaches the arts, to try to facilitate more such engagement. That would be great.
And if we can find those people, we'll send them your way.
Yeah. I have to say, Valerie, I think you told me that you're located in Maine.
Yes.
One of the most, I would say, progressive, smart directors of a Department of Corrections at the state level is Randall Liberty right there in Maine. And Commissioner Liberty's head of the Department of Corrections in Maine, and he's instituted a large number of innovations in the prison system in Maine that are models for the rest of the country. And I'm also very happy to say that he's on the advisory board for the journal. So
Oh,
we
that's
we
great.
get great engagement there.
That's very good to hear because he has done some remarkable work within the state between the earned living unit, getting rid of solitary confinement, the food programs, the gardens. There's a lot going on, and the education programs that are continuing within the main prisons are much more progressive than a lot of states. So we are
Yeah.
thankful for that, and thank you for mentioning him because he does deserve a mention.
Well, maybe an interview.
Yeah, actually, well, I haven't interviewed him, but a group I was involved with interviewed him. So, but that's a good idea. I might look into interviewing him myself.
Sure, sure. I think there's
Yeah.
another fellow in Maine, Chris Poulos. Have you heard of Christopher Poulos?
I've heard the name. I think, is he a writer?
Well, he's formerly incarcerated, but he went through law school, and now he works for a
Yes.
nonprofit representing the interests or the rights of people who are inside. But he might be another guy worth interviewing that I think might have some great ideas.
Now, is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to cover before? I definitely would like you to mention your book again and where people can find it.
Yeah, the book is called Prisons of Creativity: Artistic Innovation During Incarceration. It was just published this year by Routledge Publishing Company. Unfortunately, it's in hardback, and they issued the first edition at a very high price, so it's not cheap. I think it's in the $60 range.
Hmm.
But it's available on Amazon. It's available through Routledge. Hopefully, in a matter of time, it will be able to you'll be able to purchase used copies of it, which would be great. I have no control over it, but I'd like to see a paperback version come out. And then if you do have internet access and can read a digital copy, the price is much more affordable. It's down around $20, I think. And they change the price every now and then, so you have to be mindful of that. I also have another book, which I've pretty much finished, and I'm looking for a publisher called Prisonopolis. And Prisonopolis, as you heard before, is the name that I give to this mythical city of the population of people behind bars. And it's a critique of particularly the American prison system, but it also offers what I think is a creative reconception of what prison could be. And I would be excited to get that out soon as well. But I'm still looking for a publisher.
Well, that's great. Well, maybe someone out there listening will be getting in touch with you for that. I want to remind our listeners that we've been listening to John R. Whitman today, and we've been talking about his recent book and work with the Creative Prisons Project. You are listening to the Prison Pod. Thank you, John, for joining us today on the Prison Pod.
Thank you, Valerie. And I encourage everyone to get in touch with their creative selves. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is PrisonPod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.